You probably began your morning the same way millions of people do every day. You turned on a faucet. Clear water poured out without a second thought. You brushed your teeth, stepped into a warm shower, washed your hair, put on clean clothes, maybe used deodorant, and walked out the door expecting to smell almost like nothing. That expectation feels normal, but it's actually one of the newest habits in human history. Now imagine waking up 50,000 years ago. No running water, no soap, no toothpaste, no shampoo, no washing machine waiting to rescue yesterday's clothes. Just your body, the weather, a nearby stream if you were lucky, and whatever nature could offer. Would you smell terrible? Most people answer that question immediately, of course, but that simple answer hides a much more interesting story. Because the real question isn't whether ancient humans smelled different from us. Of course they did. The real mystery is how they managed to stay healthy enough to survive for hundreds of thousands of years without everything we call hygiene today. And the answer reveals something surprising. Our ancestors weren't dirty because they were ignorant. They were solving the same problems we solve today. They just used completely different tools. Let's begin with one place most people never think about. Your mouth. Right now, your mouth is home to hundreds of different species of bacteria. That sounds alarming until you realize that's perfectly normal. Brushing your teeth doesn't eliminate those bacteria. It simply keeps them under control. Modern toothpaste isn't a magic shield. It's maintenance. Ancient humans obviously didn't have toothbrushes, mint-flavored toothpaste, or dental floss, but that doesn't automatically mean their teeth were rotting out of their mouths. In fact, archaeologists studying prehistoric skeletons have discovered something unexpected. Many hunter-gatherers actually suffered fewer cavities than the farmers who came after them. That sounds backwards. Shouldn't civilization have improved dental health? Not necessarily. For most of human history, people ate wild meat, nuts, roots, berries, seeds, and seasonal plants. Those foods required lots of chewing and contained far fewer refined carbohydrates than later agricultural diets. Then farming arrived. Grains became common, bread became common. Soft, sticky carbohydrates began feeding the bacteria responsible for tooth decay. Ironically, one of humanity's greatest technological revolutions also gave us many of our first widespread dental problems. Progress isn't always free. Our ancestors also discovered surprisingly clever ways to clean their mouths. Long before manufactured toothbrushes, people could chew on fibrous twigs until one end frayed into soft strands. That frayed end could scrape away food particles while certain plants naturally released compounds that helped reduce bacteria. It wasn't modern dentistry, but it wasn't doing nothing either. Humans have always experimented. They watched, they learned, and if one stick seemed to work better than another, they remembered. That simple habit, paying attention, is one of the oldest technologies our species ever developed. Now let's move to the question everyone actually came for: body odor. Here's something most advertisements never mention. Fresh sweat doesn't smell very much. The unpleasant odor usually appears later. Why? Because bacteria living on your skin begin breaking down chemicals inside your sweat. The smell isn't simply sweat. It's sweat after bacteria have finished their work. That changes the question entirely. If ancient humans smelled different, what actually created that smell? The answer wasn't one thing. It was everything. Their diet, their clothing, their environment, their daily activity, the weather, the bacteria on their skin, the fires they sat beside every evening. Imagine spending an entire day walking across grasslands or forests. You're carrying tools, gathering food, hunting, climbing, building shelter. Your clothes, if you're wearing animal hides, stay with you day after day. You sleep on natural bedding. You cook over open flames. You don't return home to a washing machine. By modern standards, yes, you would almost certainly smell stronger than someone stepping out of a freshly scented shower. But stronger doesn't necessarily mean filthy. That's where our imagination often misleads us. We tend to judge ancient people using modern expectations. We assume that because they lacked commercial hygiene products, they simply accepted dirt. But humans have always understood the difference between healthy and unhealthy environments. Rotting food smelled wrong. Contaminated water smelled suspicious. An infected wound smelled dangerous. A dead animal smelled different from a fresh one. Long before laboratories existed, the human nose functioned as an early warning system. Smell wasn't merely about comfort, it was information. Imagine living in a world without expiration dates, no nutrition labels, no refrigerators, no hospitals. Your senses became your first line of defense. A strange smell could mean spoiled meat. It could warn of contaminated water. It could signal disease spreading through the group. Ignoring those clues carried consequences. In many ways, our ancestors relied on smell far more than we do today. Modern life often teaches us to ignore natural odors beneath layers of artificial fragrance. Ancient humans couldn't afford that luxury. Their survival depended on paying attention. But perhaps the most recognizable smell of prehistoric life wasn't sweat at all. It was smoke. Think about how often fire appeared in an ancient human's life. Every evening, every meal, every cold night, every dangerous encounter with predators. Fire wasn't an occasional camping trip. It was the center of daily existence. People cooked over it, gathered around it, told stories beside it, slept near it, dried animal hides above it, sharpened tools beside it. That means smoke settled everywhere, into hair, onto skin, into clothing, across bedding, onto tools, even into food. If you could travel back in time and meet one of your distant ancestors, the first thing you might notice wouldn't be sweat. It would probably be the smell of wood smoke clinging to almost everything they owned. To us, smoke might suggest a campfire or a fireplace. To them, it meant safety, warmth, cooked food, protection from predators lurking beyond the light, home. Smell carries memories. It does today, and it almost certainly did then. The scent of smoke may have been one of humanity's oldest emotional signals, a reminder that the group had survived another day. But smoke wasn't the only challenge. As humans gradually adopted clothing, another problem quietly appeared. Clothing holds odors. Animal hides trapped sweat, smoke settled into the fibers, moisture lingered after rain. And unlike modern wardrobes, people couldn't simply change outfits every morning. One set of clothing might accompany someone through weeks of travel before it could be properly cleaned or replaced. Yet clothing solved far bigger problems than smell. It protected against cold, reduced injuries, helped people expand into environments where naked skin simply wasn't enough. Every solution in human history creates a new challenge. Clothing protected the body, but it also created a comfortable home for something far less welcome: tiny parasites. Scientists studying human evolution have found that body lice live almost entirely inside clothing rather than hair. That seemingly insignificant detail provides remarkable evidence. Those insects could only evolve after humans began wearing clothing regularly. In other words, long before written history, our ancestors weren't the only ones adapting to new technology. Parasites were adapting too. Even the smallest creatures on Earth were rewriting their evolutionary story because humans had started covering their bodies. And that tells us something important. Clothing wasn't a rare luxury. It had become part of everyday life, just not the clean, freshly scented version we're used to today. So if ancient humans didn't have soap, how did they actually stay clean? The answer begins with something surprisingly simple: water. We sometimes imagine prehistoric people avoiding water altogether, as if bathing were somehow a modern invention. But that isn't what the evidence suggests. Humans have always depended on rivers, lakes, streams, and springs. They drank from them, crossed them, camped beside them. And when conditions allowed, they almost certainly washed in them too. The important difference is that there wasn't a universal routine. A family living beside a tropical river wouldn't clean themselves the same way as a hunting group crossing a frozen steppe. Climate changed everything. Season changed everything. Water availability changed everything. For some groups, washing may have been common. For others, it happened only when conditions made it practical. There wasn't one prehistoric lifestyle. There were thousands, and humans adapted to each one. But even without soap, people still had options. Sand could scrub dirt from skin, clay could absorb oils, ash from yesterday's fire could help remove grease. Certain plants released natural oils or pleasant aromas when crushed. None of these methods looked like a modern bathroom, yet each solved a small piece of the same problem. That's one of the easiest mistakes to make when thinking about ancient people. We imagine only two possibilities: modern hygiene or no hygiene at all. Reality sits somewhere in between. Our ancestors weren't trying to smell like lavender. They were trying to stay healthy. Those aren't always the same goal. Now imagine it's evening. The hunt is over. The fire is burning low. Everyone is preparing to sleep. Where exactly do you lie down? Most people picture bare dirt, maybe a cave floor covered with a few leaves. But archaeologists have uncovered something far more thoughtful. At sites in South Africa dating back tens of thousands of years, researchers found carefully prepared layers of grass and plant material arranged as bedding. Some of those plants appear to contain natural insect-repelling properties. Even more interesting, many bedding layers included ash. At first glance, that seems strange. Why would anyone deliberately sleep on ashes? Because tiny crawling insects struggle to move across fine ash. In other words, people weren't simply making themselves comfortable. They were making life harder for parasites. That's not luck. That's observation. Someone, somewhere, noticed a pattern. Sleep on this. Get bitten less. Repeat that lesson for thousands of years, and suddenly you've developed one of humanity's earliest forms of pest control. The same pattern appears again and again throughout prehistory. Humans watched nature carefully. They experimented constantly. When something worked, they remembered. Now let's talk about one of the least glamorous jobs in human history: checking someone else's hair. Lice have probably annoyed humans for almost as long as humans have existed. Before shampoos and medicated treatments, removing them meant something much simpler: time, patience, and another person. Grooming wasn't just about appearance, it was cooperation. One person sat still while another searched through hair, removed insects, checked the scalp, cleaned wounds, or untangled knots. That might sound ordinary, but in evolutionary terms, it's extraordinary. Very few animals willingly allow another individual to spend that much time touching them. Trust like that builds relationships. It strengthens families. It creates communities. Among modern primates, grooming is one of the strongest social bonds. Humans inherited that instinct, except we expanded it. We didn't just groom each other. We talked, shared stories, comforted children, taught skills, solved problems. Something as ordinary as picking lice from someone's hair may have helped strengthen the social connections that allowed our species to survive. Sometimes survival isn't about the sharpest spear. Sometimes it's about who is willing to sit beside you for half an hour helping with a problem you can't solve alone. Then there's the question everyone eventually wonders about. What about toilets? Or more accurately, the complete lack of them. For mobile hunter-gatherers, the solution was surprisingly practical: distance. If waste accumulated too close to sleeping areas or water sources, people moved away from it. Small groups possessed one enormous advantage over later civilizations: mobility. Imagine 20 people living across a landscape. Now compare that with 20,000 living inside crowded city walls. Those are completely different sanitation challenges. The earliest cities struggled with overflowing waste, contaminated water, and rapidly spreading disease because thousands of people occupied the same small space. Hunter-gatherers rarely faced those conditions. Not because they understood bacteria, they didn't, but because movement naturally prevented many problems from becoming overwhelming. Sometimes the best sanitation system is simply not staying in one place forever. That doesn't mean prehistoric life was clean by modern standards. Far from it. Cuts became infected, parasites spread, illness happened. People undoubtedly smelled stronger than we expect today. But it's important to remember something. Neither did medieval cities, neither did ancient kingdoms, neither did many people living only a few hundred years ago. The expectation that every human should smell almost completely neutral is remarkably recent. Most of history smelled like. Now imagine, just for a moment, that one of your ancestors somehow stepped into the modern world. What would surprise them most? The cars? The skyscrapers? The airplanes? Maybe. But after the shock faded, they'd probably notice something else. Everyone smells strange. Artificial flowers, artificial fruit, artificial forests, artificial oceans, soap, laundry detergent, shampoo, perfume, fabric softener, air fresheners. Every building filled with carefully manufactured scents that don't exist anywhere in nature. To us, those smells signal cleanliness. To someone from deep prehistory, they might smell almost overwhelming. Imagine walking through a supermarket laundry aisle if you've never encountered artificial fragrance before. It would probably feel less like cleanliness and more like standing inside a cloud of unfamiliar chemicals. That reminds us of something important. Clean isn't just biology, it's culture. Every society decides what clean should smell like. Today, many people expect almost no natural body odor whatsoever. For nearly all of human history, that expectation didn't exist. Bodies smelled like the lives people lived. Smoke after tending the fire, sweat after a long walk, rain after a storm, animal hides after weeks of travel, fresh earth after digging roots, wood after gathering fuel. Those weren't signs that someone had failed. They were signs that someone had survived another day. So, did ancient humans smell bad? By our standards, probably. They almost certainly smelled stronger, smokier, earthier, more like the forests, rivers, grasslands, and campfires that shaped every part of their lives. But smelling different doesn't mean living worse. Our ancestors solved problems with the resources they had. They learned which water was safer, which plants discouraged insects, which bedding stayed drier, which places became unhealthy, which wounds needed attention. They didn't have pharmacies, they had observation. They didn't have chemistry labs. They had thousands of generations of experience. And perhaps that's the biggest lesson hidden inside this surprisingly ordinary question. When we imagine prehistoric humans, it's easy to picture people who were simply waiting for civilization to rescue them. But that's not what archaeology reveals. Again and again, it shows something else. Curious people, observant people, creative people, people who constantly experimented with the world around them. The soap on your bathroom sink? The toothbrush beside it? The shampoo in your shower? Those inventions didn't appear out of nowhere. They're the latest chapter in a story that began hundreds of thousands of years ago. A story of humans trying to solve the same basic problem. How do you keep a fragile body healthy in an unpredictable world? The tools have changed. The goal hasn't. And the next time you catch the faint smell of smoke from a campfire, remember something. For thousands upon thousands of generations, that wasn't the smell of a weekend outdoors. It was the smell of home. It was the smell of family. It was the smell of safety. And for almost every ancestor you have, it was probably the most familiar smell in the world.